Good morning, everyone, from a wet and rainy Singapore. Good evening to those of you joining us from North America. Warm welcome to our final webinar in this series. My name is Frederick Nyberg. I'm the Managing Director at MedTech Innovator here in Singapore. For those of you not familiar with MedTech Innovator, we are the world's largest accelerator for startups in medical devices, digital health, and IVD. We run annual programs. We have one in the US, we have one here in Asia Pacific, and we will be beginning a whole new program for 2023 in December. So do stay tuned for that, those of you who are interested to apply. This is the 10th and final webinar in our 2022 series. We have a very critically important topic to cover today with an outstanding panel. Today's topic is really focused on commercialization, building and managing distribution channels in both in Asia Pacific as well as in the US. And joining us for this panel, and I'll have them introduce themselves in just a moment, from MedWorld Advisors in the US, Managing Director Dave Shepard is joining us from, normally based in Boston, but I think tonight he's in Chicago. So thanks, Dave, for staying up late. And joining us from here from Singapore is Kenneth Tan. Many of you here in Singapore will be familiar with Kenneth. He's on the speaker circuit quite frequently here. Kenneth is the regional president for Asia Pacific and Japan for Varian. And of course, Varian is now part of Siemens Healthineers, and Kenneth will tell us a little bit more about that. So the usual format is we'll do 60 minutes of webinar, panel discussion, and we will then close our live stream, and we'll continue with closed door Q&A for our cohort only. So again, a warm welcome to all of you. Good to have the cohort back for this final webinar. And I'll turn to our panelists. Again, warm welcome to both of you. Great to have you on the panel. Looking forward to today's conversation. I'll start maybe with Dave. Tell us briefly about yourself, your organization, and your background in sales and distribution.
Good morning, Frederick. Thank you again for having me on the webinar today. My name is Dave Shepard with MedWorld Advisors. I've been with excuse me 1 second. I was got a little cold today. So I've been with MedWorld Advisors now since about 10 years. Formerly, I was with a company called Tyco, a small little company that Kenneth might remember, and Tyco became Covidien. And then Covidien became Medtronic. And in my time at Covidien, I was the vice president of strategic alliances. And during that time, I was involved in a lot of licensing activities across the world. That's kind of the high level for me.
Very good. Thank you, Dave. And Kenneth.
Thanks, Frederick. And Dave, nice to see you after so many years and reconnect again. First of all, Frederick, thank you for having me on this session. For everyone on the line, my name is Kenneth Tan. I'm based out of Singapore. I lead the region, Asia Pacific and Japan, for Varian. And Frederick did say that Varian has recently become a Siemens Healthineers company. Varian is actually a leader in the industry that focuses on radiation oncology. And from that space in radiation oncology, we want to become leaders in being able to deliver comprehensive cancer care. The solutions and the products that we bring to the market are, large-scale capital equipment, but also behind that large-scale capital equipment is a lot of software, is a lot of services, and a lot of what you hear in health tech about AI, about data, about machine learning. These are already in the products that we bring into the market. But of course, combined with the power of Siemens Healthineers, I think the ambition is what we call, to move us in healthcare to an area or an era whereby we have digital twins of ourselves in healthcare. Been about 20 years in healthcare. And probably one of those things that makes my career unique is I've been through, 4 mergers and acquisitions through the entire career. 2 on the acquiring side, 2 on the side of being acquired. And these are always very interesting journeys. So with that, thank you very much, Frederick, again, and I'll hand it back over to you.
Terrific,
Frederick,
thank you. Yeah, of course,
Frederick,
Dave.
If I could continue on, I've got something caught in my throat there, so let me expand. So from my career on the Fortune 500 side, I was involved a lot in global commercialization. In fact, I've been involved in launching products on every major continent in the world, except for Antarctica. I haven't sold anything to penguins yet, but I'll be working on that soon. Way back in the day, I had the good fortune of being a colleague of Kenneth's. We were in different business segments, but we were at a major multinational together called Covidian. When I was there, my role was the vice president of strategic alliances in the $1.5 billion respiratory group, and our team was involved in helping M&A for that group, as well as helping licensing for the Nelcor technology. A lot of people would know that, the SpO2 and other parameters that came on along the way. We had a global team which brought me to Singapore quite a bit. So that's how I got to meet Kenneth and collaborate with great people like him and some of his colleagues there. We also had people in Europe as well. During my 6 years in that role, we did over 110 licensing deals around the world, including a major deal with Philips. I did a deal with, it wasn't Siemens at the time because Siemens sold their patient monitoring group over to Draeger, but a deal with Draeger as well. After I'd spent like 25 years in that space, when I left all that, I decided to get on the other side of the table and help middle market companies out with their exit strategy, and then also early stage companies with their growth strategy. And that has formed into this company we now call MedWorld Advisors. We're a global team of people similar to myself, based in Boston. We have a legal entity also in Hong Kong and a managing director there. And there's about 15 of us around the world, including collaboration partners in 4 countries in Europe. And what we do is we help companies. If it was Frederick Medical and you wanted to sell your company, we'll help you find a good buyer, and so you can go play golf. And what we also do is we help companies to find strategic partners if they're looking for commercialization and also looking for exit. And one example is we did help a company last year. It was actually happened to be this is public knowledge, so I can share it. A Swedish client, we helped them to obtain a commercialization deal with Johnson & Johnson in Japan, and so they're going to launch their particular system there. So that's the kind of thing that we do at MedWorld Advisors, and I'm looking forward to taking your questions and hoping we can provide some insight to your audience.
Very good. Thank you for that, Dave. Really appreciate it. We'll dive right in. We have a number of topics we want to cover. I want to talk about commercial models. I want to talk about distribution networks and working with distributors. But we also want to touch on maybe purchasing practices and some sales tactics both in APAC and the US. So maybe let's begin by looking at commercial models and starting with the basics here. The basic commercial models, I think most people are familiar with: direct, indirect, hybrid. Maybe Dave, key differences between these, and what should a startup think about as they make decisions on whether to go one way or the other?
Well, so when I first saw the topic, Frederick, and I'm thinking about the differences between the U.S. and Asia, the first thing I have to think about is the strength of your liver. If you don't have a strong liver, you can't do deals in Asia. That's what I learned early on from coming from the U.S. I think it's a little bit calmer now than it was back in my day. But on a serious note, there are a lot of differences between thinking about going to the U.S. and going into Asia. So speaking high level about it, when you think about approaching Asia, and most of the companies here that are listening are in Asia, so that I think they understand this, but maybe some of the audience on YouTube. When you think about Asia, okay, let's go launch in Asia, but it's really not a launch in Asia. It's a launch in Singapore, and it's a launch in Japan, it's a launch in China. Every single country has its own unique attributes and the way they're set up with their distribution models. And maybe as we get into it, we can talk a little bit more about some of those. And then when you get into the US, it's really it's the same thing. So there you can talk about launching into the US marketplace, and it seems simple. You got your market segment and your product. But however, it's very complicated when you go try to find a distributor. In fact, I would probably say that it's probably easier to find a specific distributor in a country in Japan that you might want to work with in your market segment than it is in the US. Now, whether making a deal with that distributor in Asia might be a little more complicated than in the US, but finding actually the right one might be easier in Asia versus in the US. So I'll pause there for a second.
Yeah, we'll come back. Thanks, Dave. We'll come back to how to actually identify and locate distributors in the US as well. Kenneth, what's Varian's structure broadly in Asia Pacific? Do you work with direct as well as indirect channels and as well as hybrid setups in some of the markets? And what are some of the pros and cons of that?
Right. I think, Frederick, I think I've been with Varian for more than 6 years, and when I took on the role in Varian, there were various models, right? There was the direct model, there was the hybrid model in various configurations, and then there was the indirect model. But I think whenever we look at long-term sustainability of the business, long-term growth of the business, compliance is extremely important. And when you take all these factors into consideration, the call-out strategy, the one pillar of strategy that we execute on, and there's no doubt about it, is go direct. Right? Go direct is the long-term sustainable strategy. For compliance reasons, right? Because we feel that as a larger organization, we are able to ensure that. And then the other piece, of course, is to be able to own the relationships with the stakeholders, the users, the patients, and also to be able to shape the market. So I think, if we take a step back, we first need to decide, where to play, how to win. But at the end of it all, the strategies for long-term sustainable business is always go direct.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, if I could add on that just a little bit, I think Kenneth is absolutely correct as far as you want to be direct. Now the challenge is sometimes when you're a early stage company that just has a little bit of seed money, and now how do I go apply that, and can I go hire a big team? It can be a little challenging to do, but his point is critical, and that is, you may be forced to start with distribution of some type, either because of your economics or just because the country, and there are some countries where distributors kind of control the channel. But the thing is to make sure you have your direct team there to own the customer relationship. So you might have sales, like even in the US, a lot of sales go through distributors like Cardinal Healthcare and Medline and that sort of thing. But your team needs to control the relationship with those customers for you to ultimately be successful. So I think he made a really good point there.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and we'll touch on that a little bit later as well. But let me just stay with you for a second, Dave. The option then for a startup that has limited resources, when does licensing become an option? Because you'd still have to work on a country by country basis if you're building distribution channels organically. Isn't it a lot easier for a small startup to sign a licensing deal with a J&J or with a larger company for half the world and go and play golf, as you say earlier, or at least go back and focus maybe on R&D, innovating the next generation product?
Yeah, and because in that particular case, if you're licensing to a Siemens or a J&J or a GE, you're actually hiring a pretty direct sales force, and you're getting some royalties on it. So it definitely can play in terms of an option, and that's why it's really important to think about your strategy very early on in your business plan around your commercialization strategy. I think you have to understand about, okay, you have to think a little bit, even going deeper than that. Who am I as an entrepreneur? Who is our executive team? Who are our backers? What do we really have the grit to go out and do? Do we want to raise $100 million and go build a global company and then we'd sell it for $1 billion someday? Some people do that, and then more power to them. Other people think we want to get to a certain stage and then we're gonna sell the company. And others say, you know what, we're really good technology development people, so let's develop the technology to a certain level and let's just make sure it gets to market, whether that's distribution or licensing. So licensing is a very viable option, Frederick, as you mentioned. Now, one of the things to realize is some products are more licensable than others, and some you may need to, even if you're working with a Stryker or a J&J or Smith & Nephew or Siemens, you may need to spend a lot of time training their sales force before you, like train the trainer type of thing before you. So you may not just sign the deal and go play golf right away. And I know you didn't mean it that way, but it's really, it's going to, first of all, it's going to be a lot of work. Like if I was to go do a deal with Siemens right now, I guarantee you, Kenneth and I could do it in a weekend, and then our lawyers would take 12 months to put that deal together. So you have to be aware of those things as well. So you have to really, there's a lot of considerations to take place.
Yeah, no, that's clear. Kenneth, I want to talk briefly about leadership qualities required in commercialization. I know that you're deeply involved in the mentor circle here in Singapore. What are some of the specific leadership qualities that are needed for commercialization, especially in a startup? And for a startup that may be looking to recruit from outside to have someone lead their commercial activities, is there a risk to get someone on board from who only has multinational experience, or is that a good option for a startup?
Right. Thank you for asking that question, Frederick. I do the core work that I do, which is the career, and then on the side, there is leadership mentoring that I do as Asia Mentor Circle, and during that period of time where we were all stuck in Singapore and we couldn't travel, I did a little bit of startup mentoring with the NUS programs and the SMU programs. And what you will see in these programs is there are these advisors. And sometimes what I see is people may have this mindset of either or, the polarized mindset that you are in a startup and your mindset is different versus you are in a multinational company, your mindset is different. Now, here is the unique thing, right? As leaders, we are within the organizational ecosystem always pitching for investments in our initiatives. It doesn't mean that just because I'm the APAC president, I don't have to pitch, I don't have to align the stakeholders. So, to this question of whether a corporate leader is a good advisor versus a leader that may have brought their startup to a sale or brought their startup to an IPO, I think you will need both. You will need both perspectives. To have an either or is not doing your own startup justice. I think having that different perspective, and you as a business owner or business creator having that advisor group and making that decision, being part of that decision is important. Do not outsource that decision. Very often, startup founders may say, hey, I'm good at this, I'm good at the technology, I'm good at the product, I'll leave commercialization to someone else. I think a couple of themes here. One, is not either or. That diversity of thought, that diversity of your advisor group is important. Have a combination, and do not outsource your decisions. Be part of that decision making process. I think these are some of the critical things to to success.
Thanks, Kenneth. That's really insightful. Appreciate your views on that. Staying on the topic of commercial models, just for another minute or so, Dave. One of the things that I believe is fairly unique to the US is this concept of 1099,
right.
Which some of our attendees may be familiar with. Can you tell us a bit about what that is? This essentially, my understanding is this is the independent sales rep, which is an option that I think many are going for in the US market. What is it? How does it work? How common is it? And do you come across that in APAC at all?
Yeah, so a 1099, essentially, just think about it as an individual corporation.
It's a tax code. It's a tax code, isn't it? That's where the number comes from.
So if I'm Dave Shepard, sales rep, I just happen to be a 1099 rep. So it's not what I have on my website, right? So that might be Shepard Distribution, but in the tax code wise, I am. But it's just commonly referred to as 1099 because that's the style of reps, and that style of rep does behave a little differently than other styles of rep. And a 1099 can be an individual, so it could just be me, and then Frederick, you could have your company and you could reach out to Dave Shepard and say, hey, can you distribute this product? And I can maybe say, yeah, maybe I can do that for you. Now it's a big country, so how much of it do you want me to cover? Or do you want me to focus on the top tier hospitals, or do you want me to cover a smaller region to do a test pilot, that sort of thing? Or I might be a group. It might be Shepard Distribution Group, and there might be 15 of us across the country that we've kind of banded together, and we got somebody in Florida, somebody in California, somebody in New York, and we're working together. And then usually in this case, we've picked a certain market segment that we might focus on, that we align on. A lot of times this really happens in orthopedics more than others, but it happens across segments from cardio to ortho to respiratory and that sort of thing. And so basically what you're getting in a 1099 rep is you're getting an independent rep or an independent group of reps, to answer your question.
Right. And have you come across something similar in Asia Pacific?
I don't know that I have directly. I might have dealt with them, not even understood it, because I don't think I got to the tax code part of it. But I definitely, there are small businesses, in Asia Pacific, just like there are larger ones. So maybe I'm not sure on that.
But in the US, essentially, it means that they're not on your payroll. They're independent, and you work with them as independent contractors. Thanks for that. Moving along, let's talk a bit more about working with distributors. And we touched on this briefly earlier, and maybe Dave, I'll stay with you here for a second. And you were in Singapore at one of the major medtech trade shows just a month or so ago. What is a question that we get very often from our cohort is, what is the best way for a medtech startup to find a distributor, whether in the US or whether in a specific country in Asia Pacific? And what role does an exhibition or a trade show play in that?
Right. Yeah, I think that trade shows do play a role, but I think in terms of being able to find a distributor, I think Kenneth used this earlier on. You have to back up a little bit before you even get to that stage and understand as right. So how do I go to market? What is my go to market strategy? And what am I going to market with, and what are the strengths that I have relative to my products and solutions? And I would do a little research as far as which countries I'm going to be strongest in with that. And then once I understand that, then okay, now I want to go find a distributor in Japan, or I want to go find a distributor in China, or in the US. And then you need to do a little bit of homework as far as who's in the market segment. One of the best ways to really find good distributors, it really depends upon your experience in the industry and the kind of advisors you have, is to actually ask some of the customers, because they'll tell you who are the ones that are really doing a good job. And then you have to find out, okay, now is that distributor someone that has room on their distribution card to be able to take us on without having a competitor? Or you have to think about those types of things. So I think, because you have to really assess, okay, this one might be bigger, they fit everything that you want, but then they may not have much time for me. The other one might be small, they can focus on me, but they may not be big enough to really be able to do much oomph for me. So you have to really look at all the things, the size of it, the strength, the market focus. There's really a lot to consider in that equation.
Yeah, great point. And Kenneth, in terms of the value typically that when you work with distributors, or if you were to advise startups working with distributors, what's some of the critical value that you would expect to see the distributor bring to the table?
Frederick, I think the way I look at this is there are two dimensions, right? I think one is ground yourself first, and that grounding is very, very important. When I say ground yourself, what do I mean, right? I talk about one, having a diverse panel of advisors to advise you on your strategy. You need, as startups, what I see is very often startups or founders start with a vision, a mission, a purpose. And as they go along pushing commercialization, that gets lost a little bit, and it's always about pivoting. It's always about it may sometimes be taking the path of least resistance. I think that grounding in your strategy is important, because if you believe that your strategy works and your strategy is the path forward, then why diverge in that sense, right? So, and part of that strategy is answering, where to play and how to win. And if that's very, very clear to you, you then begin to know where to go to look for your partners and what you need to do to win and whether your partners can enable you to do that. So that grounding is the most important. Very often what I see is strategy divergence, purpose divergence. And that, that destroys a lot of the initial work and that has been put in to the startup founding. The second piece is, as you begin to be presented with all these channel options, right? How do you assess them? How do you know what really works and what really doesn't work, right? And I think you need to understand the nature of the business. I'll give you an example. The very, very simple thing to look for is call point synergies and portfolio synergies, right? If there's no call point synergy, then the distributor technically doesn't know your customer. They have to go uncover your customer, right? If there's no portfolio synergy, that means the distributor is going in to only sell one product. So there's no efficiencies there. So I think it's important to look for call point synergies and portfolio synergies. Now, then if your business is a lot more complex, let's say, for example, the Varian business, the Siemens Healthineers business is a lot more complex. It's not just about product, it's about managing the projects, managing the construction. Now, is there a need, right, for your distributors to qualify? Like, for example, there could be local rules that say for a distributor to take part in certain tenders, they have to have a history of project of a certain value. All these are basically barriers. So if you pick the wrong distributor and you sign a 2-year exclusive agreement with them, you technically are dead in that market. So I think there is this understanding of the local intricacies that you have to worry or be aware of. Now, there are distributors that are just sales channels, and there are business partners that have got innovative business models that bring innovative business models to the market. There are business partners who do leasing arrangements. They do PPP arrangements with, they may own, the hospitals also. So are these relevant? Are these not relevant? I don't know. But I think you have to think about what the assessment criteria is so that you don't end up with or so that you end up with the right channel partner for the long term.
I think that's great advice, Kenneth. And it comes back to what Dave was saying earlier about ensuring that you have your go-to-market strategy thought through in some detail before you even start to hunt for distribution partners. Very good point. We'll talk a bit about purchasing practices a bit later on. Obviously, the whole selling cycle with large capital equipment like you guys are working with at Varian is quite unique and poses some very unique challenges where you need to work with as we were saying, with architects and hospital construction, I guess M&E project managers and those sorts of stakeholders as well. Dave, just a practical question that sometimes comes up from startups here is in terms of the regulatory role that they might play. What's been your experience there? Should a startup be comfortable letting the distributor handle that, the regulatory approval, essentially, or are there some things that they should watch out for as they are effectively delegating that to a local partner?
That's a great question, Frederick. We often talk a lot about that particular issue with startups and really early stage companies, because obviously your regulatory registration is very important for your ability to do business. And so in some countries, that can really be a positive attribute of having that distributor, because that distributor can help you to be able to get in the market, and they can help you register the product. And to the uneducated, because you can make a good decision. Sometimes you can be educated and make a bad decision. It happens to all of us. But if you're educated about it, at least you're asking the distributor, okay, and your team about how we're setting this up. They're going to register this product for us. are we retaining control of the rights to that registration? So if we end up terminating this relationship, do we get that control back? If we don't get that control back, do we really want to get into this relationship? It's something very important to understand from the very beginning. So so it's not necessarily a negative if a distribution is going to help you with the registration to get into it. The important thing is to understand the relationship you have and what your ability to control that if you choose to go a different direction, because as Kenneth says, sometimes you might need to go a different direction.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And you do hear from time to time horror stories about Japan, for example, where you part ways with the distributor and they hold on to the shonen and essentially hold you hostage until you either pay them or find some other solution. So that can be a challenge. Kenneth, I want to talk briefly about the structure of distribution networks in Asia Pacific, and there are several markets where we have multiple tiers of distributors. And I don't know to what extent this affects the work that you do at Varian, but let's say whether it's China, mostly Northeast Asia, China, Korea, Japan, to some extent Taiwan. Medical device companies typically have to navigate multiple tiers of distributors. You got local, you got national, you got regional, you have local dealers. What are some of the challenges there, and what are some of the recent trends that we're seeing in Asia Pacific in terms of perhaps consolidation of distribution channels in some markets?
Well, Frederick, I think this is a very difficult and complex question to answer, because once again, we need to understand that not all markets are at the same level of maturity. But before I touch on that, I just want to reinforce Dave's point. When it comes to licenses, do not take the path of least resistance. The licenses are the lifeline of a sustainable revenue, right? Being in a position whereby we have tried to integrate a lot of companies that we have bought, in not just in Siemens Healthineers, but previous companies also. Licenses are the most complex part of transferring. So that area, please be very, very thoughtful about that. Now, when it comes to the question that you're asking, Mr. Rick, I think it all boils down once again to what do you think is the most effective strategy, right? For commercialization to reach your customer. I think, I think in large geographies, right, to reach the end customer in the most remote places of the countries, I think there is definitely going to be a need for a tiered distributor structure. We have to recognize that no matter how big a distributor is, it is very difficult for one large distributor to have the depth of the relationship across the large geography. And if you look at a lot of the large markets, India, China, in Asia Pacific, you have to recognize that India is not really India. India is multiple states, multiple cultures. China, once again, multiple regions, multiple cultures. And some of these subcultures within the countries have got its own localness to it of doing business. So I think in these large geographies, if there is a push for a distributor, towards a distributor model, we have to recognize that it is likely going to be multi-tier. I think the question you need to ask yourself is, who owns the relationship with the decision makers or the end users? The distributors are just a channel. They are one piece of the strategy. Ultimately, who owns the relationship with the end user? And if your answer is you own the relationship then the distributor is just one piece of your strategy. There is a need to evolve towards an organization that owns those relationships. And also depends on what kind of markets you are playing in. If you are playing in a market that has got a large customer base, large geography, I think you're gonna just have to accept that multi-tier. Now, the other thing you need to be aware of is, and this is also part of assessing your distributors, right? Are your distributors able to give you that transparency in that market? Of course, if your distributors are able to give you that transparency, you're working with great partners. But if the distributor is unable to give you the transparency or may intentionally create opacity in the market, then these are terrible signs to look out for. That means you may not be dealing with the right partners. So I think there are these nuances that we need to be aware of as we navigate.
Great point, Kenneth. Thanks for that. And what you brought up here in terms of potential challenges with opacity and in the relationship with distributors, it brings us to the point about due diligence. What due diligence should a principal or a manufacturer, whether they're a startup or a multinational, ideally do on a distributor before appointing them? And Dave, maybe I'll turn to you on this. If you're a big multinational and you go to appoint a distributor in a certain territory, you have the brand, you have the clout, you can insist that they turn over their accounts to you. If you're a small startup, you don't necessarily have that. How can you, if you're a smaller company, do that due diligence to learn more about your distributor before you appoint them?
Yeah, it's an interesting topic, Frederick. It's funny, if I've seen early stage companies and in big companies as well, but early stage companies make a decision to make a hire and do extreme diligence on hiring that marketing manager or that salesperson. And yet, conversely, they go to hire a distributor in a particular territory, and somebody introduces them to the distributor. They go have a good meeting, and all of a sudden, they're making a deal.
Right.
And they just don't really know. They've just had one date. It's a great question, and it's really important that you treat this like this is going to be a marriage, because in a way, in that particular territory, whether that's a region of a country or a whole country or a whole continent, it is actually going to be a marriage, and so you need to know who you're going to be in bed with, so to speak. So you need to ask the questions and not be afraid to ask the questions, because if they're considering taking your product, you've got something to offer, because you're going to make them money. You may not be able to ask it maybe as abruptly, like kind of at Siemens or Medtronic. They might say, "Hey, my accounting department's going to be doing this." You might do it. You might have to do it similar and say, "Listen, for us to do business together, I understand you need to know about us. We're happy to share with you. We need to know a little bit more about you. We need to talk to a couple of your salespeople. We need to talk to a couple of your customers. We need to really understand your model and just understand your track record. And then, of course, do some of the financial due diligence that you would do with anybody you'd be doing business with."
Yeah, thanks for that, Dave. Kenneth, your thoughts on that? You must have a quite a formalized way of approaching this within your organization.
I think being having worked in an MNC environment, right? Early days in Boston Scientific, Covidien, Medtronic, Varian. So in these large multinational listed companies, there are these statutory obligations, right? That we all have, and within the organizations, there are very robust processes put in place. There are organizations put in place to assess distributors. So I think we call it distributor due diligence. That's an established process. Now, a lot of that process also involves external third-party diligence, right? So what it basically means is there are third parties out there that one can pay to perform this diligence, and they're not obscene amounts of money. There is basic diligence that you should be doing. Now, once again, it goes back to the commercialization strategy. If your commercialization strategy is longer term, focus on large markets, Japan, right? China, India, that you have to be in there for a long time to be successful. You have to invest to be successful. Very, very unique local laws and regulations. Then it may make sense for startups to invest in that due diligence, deeper due diligence, I would say, beyond, just you and I having a couple of conversations, meeting your team, you meet my team. I think there is, there is a case in these large markets for putting extra investments into due diligence, because what are the risks? What are the downsides? If you pick the wrong partner, the partner does the wrong move, you may be excluded from these markets in the long term. And you have seen large multinational companies excluded or banned from these markets. So can you imagine, if you can imagine you not playing in the market, great, right? But if you can't imagine yourself not playing in that market, then that investments in diligence are going to be critical.
Great point, Kenneth. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, and Frederick, if I could maybe just add on to that diligence thing. When you first think of diligence, you think about the basic things, about their financial strength and that sort of thing, and then Kenneth mentioned compliance. The other part of it is even things as simple as scope of territory and geography. I can remember companies going to China and finding, I found this really great distributor in China, and they did. However, they were a really great distributor in Shenzhen, but they couldn't get to Shanghai, and let alone get to Beijing. And so really, before rushing to get to that deal, then having to understanding really the depth and breadth of that distributor, and what are they good at, not only in terms of their channel, as Kenneth has mentioned, and what are their relationships in their portfolio, but what's the scope of where are they strong and where they're not strong. So maybe you might want to do a regional deal for the south of China for one company, for one distributor, and north of China for another one. And this is actually the same thing that is similar in the US. You may be able to get one global group, but you might actually find really good pockets in southeast of the US and northeast of the US as well.
Yeah, great point. And I recall myself having worked with distributors here in one example in a country here in that shall remain unnamed in Southeast Asia, where the distributor brought in people essentially from the road to sit in and attend a training session, really just to make their team look much bigger and more impressive. But the reality was that their core team was only about 3 or 4 people. So uncovering some of those sorts of things is obviously very much part of that diligence process. You touched on compliance. I think both Kenneth and Dave, and maybe let's just cover that very, very briefly. And when we talk about compliance, for those of you attending the webinar here, we're looking at the really anti-bribery and corruption compliance for medical device companies. For big multinationals, this is a huge thing, with major compliance teams that are focused on ensuring that everyone does the right thing, including distributors, and there are codes of conduct in place and so on. How important, and Dave, maybe I'll turn to you on this, how important is this for a startup venture? Should they even bother thinking about this? Is there a risk that if one day they're looking to exit in a trade sale to a multinational, not doing the right thing now is something that can come back and haunt them?
Frederick, that's an excellent question, and I can tell you just from recent experience of an international transaction we did where we helped a startup, a company that was about 5 years into business. We helped them they were at an inflection point. They had established some traction, and they would decide to go out and raise more money, or do we go ahead and sell to a strategic partner now? They went ahead and decided to sell to a strategic partner, but that question came up, that compliance. And often when you're going to be selling to that strategic partner, you to get the maximum value, you're going to be selling to a bigger company, and that bigger company has to abide by those rules. Mm-hmm. And so part of their diligence right away is going to be, have you abided by those rules? Because they are not going to want to take on that risk of having to clean that up. Then maybe there are some small things that they can clean up, but if it's often, we talked about from my time being in a bigger company versus now, is is, the lawyers, if you're a small company and they know you don't have any money, they're smart because they're not going to waste their time. But as soon as that risk goes into the bandwidth of a big company and the brand of a big company, now, even though it wasn't their mistake, but they bought that mistake, now the lawyers are coming after you, and it's a huge liability. So it's something you need to prevent from the very beginning.
Yeah, great point. Thanks for that. Now we do only have. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
One
Kenneth.
more perspective to that.
Please, Kenneth.
Because we are talking to startups here, and assuming that as startups, your solutions are going to be innovative. And a lot of these innovative solutions that you bring to the market are going to be sitting somewhere in between current regulations, right? And sometimes whether you need to register, you don't need to register, it's a matter of interpretation of the rules. I give you an example, right? You're going to bring AI software and launch it into Vietnam, right? There are no established rules that you can follow, right? And these, based on how you interpret those rules and bring these to the market, may have implications at the time of your exits. Okay. Can you imagine if you were a startup selling an AI machine learning software that has been launched in multiple markets, and upon diligence, right, or upon integration, right, the parent company, the one that bought you, begins to realize that, oh, right, a lot of these were brought to the market with a different or a more liberal interpretation of local licensing regulations, and potentially you may have to unwind orders, re-register the products. It changes the pro forma. It changes the valuation. So think strategically about this, especially when you're bringing all these innovative products that are not being covered by current licenses. How do you want to go about that? And no one really knows the answer. But if you bring more people, you consult with more people, you will have a more viable, sustainable answer. I think that's one of those things that we need to realize.
Yeah. Great point, Kenneth. Thanks for that. Now, I'm conscious of the fact that we only have about 12 minutes or so left. Quick word to our attendees. Please queue up your questions for our panelists using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to those as soon as we get into Q&A. Kenneth, I wanted to stay with you for a second and talk a bit about how to motivate distributors. I know this is a challenge, especially if you're a smaller company. You may not even know exactly how much margin to give away to a distributor. What do you typically do at Varian as a large organization, and what would you recommend maybe for a startup to keep a distributor motivated, loyal, and ultimately successful?
I think this is a general motivational question, right? And I guess where I'm coming from fundamentally is it's not going to be easy to motivate people who are not motivated, right? I think it's easy to enable people who are motivated, and I think that's probably where the mindset comes from. It's more enabling the distributors to be successful, right? Understanding what it takes to win in the market, right? I've been involved with, very different kinds of portfolios, right? Very simple commodity portfolios, tubes. Dave, Tyco, Kendall, famous for, 1 inch by 1 inch alcohol swaps that made a lot of money for us, right? So those require a slightly different kind of selling behavior, right? Because it's more tender behavior. And then there are pacemakers, stents that require distributors to support these cases, have consignment management capabilities. So I think it's more about understanding the capabilities that you need to win. Then it comes to complex, capital equipment today that we sell, capital equipment plus construction management, right? Having those liabilities in the contracts and the penalties in the contracts. So I think it first understand the strategy. That's one. Two, select the right partner, one who is aligned and committed, right, to your success. Then what do you need to do to enable? Because some businesses don't need market development. Some do, right? If you are selling alcohol swaps, you don't need to develop the market for alcohol swaps. But if you are, if you are launching a robot, a digital therapeutic, you need to not just train the sales force. You need to realize that you also need to shape the mindsets. And we need to recognize that distributors are great at selling. They are great at market share. They are great at market share in an established therapeutic space. But are they going to be great at a new therapeutic space that you're trying to create? No. Can you count on them to create that? My experience, and I'll probably put money on this, is no, right? If there's going to be a lot of market development work that you're going to do, no matter what you do, you can't enable the distributor. The distributor is a partner, and you have to be an equal partner in that market development space because they don't know the market, right? You're going to have to enable that. If it's just an established therapeutic space and it's all about market share, that's a lot easier. It's about driving marketing events, either getting them to do it, helping them to do it. It's about sales force effectiveness, basically training the sales force, enabling them with the right tools. If it's not an established therapeutic space, then the skill sets are very, very different. So just be aware. And if the cohort here is a startup cohort, I'm going to suspect that a lot of the products that you bring to the market are going to be innovative in a therapeutic area that's not established. And please don't live in this illusion that a distributor that is basically selling organization likely going to reduce the value of your product by lowering the price is going to be the most effective one, and you can just outsource everything.
Yeah, great point, Kenneth. And I'll turn to Dave as well for your feedback and maybe ask you to be, if you're able to provide some specific guidance on to startups, for example, on how to determine margin expectations, and how do you get into and manage those conversations with a prospective distributor?
Right. Yeah, that's an excellent question, Frederick. As far as the margin expectations are concerned, it's really critical. It goes back to your previous question about motivation. Because if I'm a distributor and you have a great innovative product, however, and you're giving me this opportunity in the channel, and I have a good channel, however, if you're not allowing me to have enough margin to make any money on it, I'm obviously not going to be that motivated. I may not have enough money to pay my salespeople, so you have to make sure that you have good margins. So part of it gets back to the homework we've been talking about since the beginning of this webinar that Kenneth's talked about, you've talked about, I've talked about, is you need to understand the market and what the market opportunity is relative to the end pricing. So you need to know what that distributor, not only what you're going to sell it to the distributor for, but you need to know what the distributor is going to sell it for. So going back to, we talked earlier about transparency. We want to make sure there's transparency in that relationship. So you know what you're making, and you know what your distributor is making, and it needs to be a reasonable deal on both sides. It needs to be within reasonable to market expectations. And so that's really where you need to start in terms of margins. As far as specific margins, different types of products might have different types of margins. Capital equipment might have one type of margin, and disposables might have most major companies will tell you in the disposable type of products, they're looking for at least 70 or 75% margins on those products. On capital equipment, since we have a capital equipment expert here, I'll let Kenneth answer that question.
Well, maybe that's sensitive information that I will not review.
I was going to say, I would be surprised if you'd be open to share that. We'll let you off the hook. We'll let you off the hook, Kenneth. Staying with you, Kenneth, for just a minute. Obviously, tell us a little bit, very briefly, about the very complex selling cycle that you go through at Varian, and I'd be interested to also understand. I think our core would be interested to understand the technical service component as a standalone business. I think is often overlooked in smaller companies. Everyone's focusing on that capital equipment sale, but ultimately subsequent technical service contract can be hugely profitable as well. Your thoughts on that?
Correct. I think first thing I will not share the details, but I do want to reaffirm your comment, Frederick, that services, solutions, software are definitely a lot more profitable than the capital equipment. I think that's a known fact, and we recognize that. I think we have focused a lot on the channel capabilities, the customer base. We talked a little bit about the call point synergies. We talked a little bit about the portfolio synergies, right? The one that faces the customer. I think there is a critical part that you brought up, Frederick, and that is if you are providing complex solutions, right? What other competencies that your distributor bring into the mix that you have to look at and assess, right? Does the distributor have a field service engineering organization that can help you ensure that your products are not just bought, but then they are sustainably used and they perform well over a period of 10 years? Because the capital equipment cycle, it's 10 to 15 years. So you have to ensure that you deliver good quality products that work over a period of 10 years. So, is there a customer service organization? Is there a field service engineering organization that's able to support that? Especially if you are bringing digital therapeutics, right, software into the market. Software needs updating, right? What is going to happen, when you roll out a new version, right? When you roll out a patch. So I think there are all these things that you need to take into consideration. I give you an example. There are distributors that only have salespeople, and there are distributors that I've encountered with that may have their own software development team internally for localization also, right? Once again, if you are in the information system space, if your solutions are talking about EMR solution, you're definitely going to need localization. Now, are you going to localize that out of Singapore? Are you going to localize that out of the US? Or do your channel partners bring some form of localization capabilities? Now, in this current context, right, today's world, the distributors' supply chain, logistics, and warehousing capabilities are going to be critical, right? The ability to hold spare parts, move spare parts, the ability to clear customs, right? Have good credit with banks, have good local logistics. All these are going to be critical for success, but they're often overlooked. Once again, it all matters when you are looking at a short-term view or a longer-term view. And when I talk about long term, I don't talk about 15 years or 10 years. I talk about something around the 5 years. These still need to be taken into the consideration. And Dave would know, I think a lot of the stent business, the implantable business, orthopedic business is all consignment. And consignment is determined by the logistics capabilities of your distributors, not just the selling capabilities. Your logistics capabilities are going to be critical also. Yeah.
Frederick, before we lose the Google audience, can I just throw in one last thing around going commercialization through different parties? One of them, obviously, we talked about early on, but haven't gotten back to, is through strategic partners or larger MNCs. The one thing I would just ask everybody to think about is deal structure. Deal structure is really important because the MNCs, they're professionals. They know about putting together deals and how they want to be able to wrap up the deal with you in the best way for them and make it win-win. Of course, they want to make sure you're viable because you're not good to them if they're not. But they also want to have future rights. And sometimes that's relative to other territories, sometimes to your company. And make sure that you analyze those very carefully, because that sometimes could be a right of first refusal, can be a right of first negotiation. Make sure that you get an advisor that understands those terms. And then for your company, you understand what the implications are before you sign into any deal like that. So I just wanted to make sure we got that in on this call.
No, that's great. Thanks, Dave. And we are now at the top of the hour, so we're going to have to wrap up, I'm afraid. Great conversation, important topic. I think we covered a number of issues here, and we could go on discussing this for some time. Before we close, before we part ways with our YouTube audience, I'll turn to each of our panelists. If you have any last words of wisdom for our startups, or final thoughts or guidance to the startup attendees here, and maybe Kenneth, I'll turn to you first.
I would say two. I would say one. Startup requires a lot of starting up. Requires a lot of courage. And if you look at the underlying courage, it's based on some level of vision, some level of mission, some level of purpose. Do not lose sight of that. I've seen a lot of pivots during COVID that have taken founders away from their original mission and vision. So one, do not lose sight, ground yourself in that. Two, the advisors that you have are going to help you make the best decisions. So have the best advisors, have diversity in your advisory group. Think of your advisors like your informal board or your virtual board, right? And you want diversity in your board. So I think these are the two critical pieces. It's all about making the right decisions with the right information.
Thanks a lot, Kenneth. Great point about advisory board. We did actually have a whole separate webinar on that topic and the importance of getting the right mix in your advisory board. Dave.
Yeah, so thank you for the question, and thank you again for the opportunity to be on this panel. And Kenneth, great to be on the panel with you. It's great to see you again, my friend. So as far as there's probably two things that I would leave people to think about. Number one is, when you begin your company, begin with the end in mind. So don't get to the point where you need to be thinking about your distribution. Don't get to the point where you need to be thinking about your exit, and then start figuring out what your plan is. When you're putting together your great idea, your innovation, in parallel, be working on what is my channel to market, what is my commercialization strategy going to be. These things can be dynamic, they can be adapted, they can be changed, but begin with the end in mind, where you want to be today and how you want to either exit in the future or how you want to build up a billion-dollar company. But think about those things, and then your commercialization strategy will enter into it along the way, and then you'll find the right channel partners if you have the right advisors, like Kenneth mentioned. And the second thing I would say is, as you get started, bigger is not always better. Sometimes it might be better if for example, if you're coming to the U.S., it might be better to come to Iowa and own the state of Iowa with your product, and be able just to show that you can get this adoption. You can scale. Your product is scalable. It's adoptable. Because what distributors are looking for, whether it's a smaller one or a bigger one, they're looking for scalable products that they can plug and play. And so if you can show them, you can create that adoption model in Iowa, and you can create it anywhere in the U.S. That part is clear. There might be similar analogies in each country, but bigger is not always better. But the big thing is to be able to create that example of how your product can be adopted. And then once you can prove that, you can take it almost anywhere.
Great advice. Thank you both so much for taking the time out and for joining us this morning. Really appreciate it. We will stop our live stream here. Don't hang up. Stay on the line, Dave and Kenneth. We'll move into our closed door Q&A here in just a moment. But Rod, you can